Hey, turn that off. It's not gonna be that kind of video. Welcome everyone to this discursive, informative, and reflective video about why we should continue saying that international relations began in 1648, but from an alternative perspective. This video can be seen as a contribution to the discourse that Buzan and Little present in the introduction to their book International Systems in World History, and to the wider discourse about the role of international relations throughout the course of history, in light of answering the question about when international relations started. We agree with Buzan and Little in that existing frameworks in IR are seriously crippled by their failure to build on a long view of history, and that it is important to look at systems that may not resemble our own when comparing systems within which different types of polities through history have interacted. However, while they argue that international relations extend back 5,500 years and say that the first fully fledged international systems emerged when state like units began to emerge and interact, we argue that the systems that existed before our modern international system cannot be conceptualized under the concept of international systems, and their relations can therefore not be termed as international relations. We will argue that through this thesis. The point at which international relations began was in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, and not before due to the distinctive concept of a nation and the notion of national consciousness, which did not emerge until the 16th century, and because the Peace of Westphalia established the basis for a system within which nation states have been the main actors, which is so distinctive due to its monumental attempt at codifying an international set of laws which have in many ways provided the basis for many important institutions and the structure of the modern international system, and its unique and defining emphasis on establishing state sovereignty. This is not to say that the Westphalian system is a standard system through which lens we should analyze all other systems, but rather to distinguish the Westphalian system as the international system among a plethora of other systems in which other type of polities, such as city-states and empires, through history have interacted. And since it is the international system, it is within this system that international relations have taken place. Although a more thorough and nuanced analysis of the systems within which different types of polities through history have interacted is needed in order to get a better understanding of modern international relations, it is counterproductive to try to pull the term international over these systems due to its conceptual limitations. When analyzing a question as open and broad as "Do you think international relations began in 1648?", it is natural to take a closer look at the core concept of the question: international relations. What are international relations? Its straightforward meaning is relations between nations. Then one could reason that to find out when international relations began, you just have to look at when nations emerged and began to interact and create relations. Now, as with any other abstract concept in social sciences, one single point in time cannot be determined as the moment when the nation appeared. Therefore, we have to turn to scholarly literature to get some insight into this. We turn to Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, where he primarily analyzes the emergence of nationalism, but also analyzes the emergence of the notion of national consciousness, and thus how nations emerged in the first place.
Anderson explains that the convergence of capitalism and print technology on the fatal diversity of human language create the possibility of a new form of imagined community, which in its basic morphology set the stage for the modern nation. So some of the big changes that took place between the 15th and the 17th century allow for the formation of nations. These include the technological changes that allow for exponential growth in capitalist manufacturing of print, which led to the print press companies seeking markets in languages other than the limited market of elite Latin readers. Thus, printing and selling writings and books in the vernacular languages became widespread throughout Europe. This led the basis for national consciousness in the way that it created an awareness of the thousands or millions of people that spoke and read the same language as them, helped build the sense of a common history which is central to the subjective idea of an imagined community, that is a nation. The potential stretch of these communities were inherently limited and at the same time bore none but the most fortuitous relationships to existing political boundaries. Something that intrinsically links this to the idea of a new system, an international one, is that these processes, fueled by print capitalism, created language of power of a kind different from the older administrative vernaculars, providing the basis for the formation of new forms of of relations. So, as these quotes from Anderson's book show, the notion of nations emerged through some specific process that took place between the 15th and 17th century. The changes described happened simultaneously and in interrelation with the Protestant Reformation in Europe, and the spread of the Bible in vernacular languages as well. Definitely contributed to the diminishing power of the Catholic Church and polarization of Catholics and Protestants within the Holy Roman Empire. These shifts in power and the political landscapes of Europe led to the instability in the region, and in 1618 the 30 Years' War broke out between the feuding Catholic and Protestant states within the Holy Roman Empire, which gradually evolved to become a conflict involving most of Europe.
The 30 Years' War ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and it is at this moment that we argue that international relations began. Though we have seen that the birth of nations started in the centuries before the Peace of Westphalia, and that one could therefore argue that international relations may have started before 1648. There are some key takeaways from the Peace of Westphalia we have to look at before making that assumption. First of all, in one of the first attempts at modern international diplomacy, it set a new precedent for how diplomacy would be conducted, and through attempts at codifying an international set of laws, it essentially provided the basis for international communities like the European Union and the United Nations, which are distinct types of institutions in the modern international system. However, one might argue that diplomacy was not a new or distinct phenomenon from Westphalia. From over 3,000 years ago, the Amarna letters is evidence of diplomacy between rulers of lands north in ancient Egypt. However, this system was to a larger extent hierarchical, and the rulers were vassals to the Egyptian king and spoke and acted thereafter. This is what makes the Peace of Westphalia distinct, as this notion of an international effort to solve a conflict using diplomatic methods, where all sides participated and agreed to a compromise, rather than a dominant polity simply dictating policy to a losing polity, was very new in the 17th century.
This, of course, has to be seen in direct relation to the formal establishment and solidification of state sovereignty, which is in theory a core value and principle to our international system. It essentially formalized the system as anarchic, an anarchic system where the later developed nation-states would become the main actors, with no supranational power ruling over them. Here it is important to note that the formal establishment of sovereignty does not necessarily translate into practice in reality, as we can see examples of during this time and as we can still see examples of today. However, this is why we can say that international relations began in 1648. And though the emergence of the concept of nations was a long process, we started some time before the Peace of Westphalia took place. 1648 is the most appropriate point to determine that international relations started due to the distinctive system that emerged out of it. Now, what is very important here is that we're not distinguishing the Westphalian system as the only international system to make it seem like a superior system or as the perfect example of a system out of which all other systems in which polities have interacted should be studied. We acknowledge the Eurocentrism this may carry, and we emphasize the limitations of this system, both in its historical and geographical scope. We are rather distinguishing it due to its unique characteristics, out of which it follows that other systems cannot be studied through the Westphalian lens. We argue that the Westphalian international system has to be studied as a system among and in relation to the wide range of other systems within which polities have interacted. Attempts at studying previous and even ancient systems through the lens of international relations may even contribute to reinforcing the notion that our modern international system is a template from which we should study all other systems and their interpolity relations. While what is actually needed in order to get a better understanding of modern international relations is a better understanding of the types of systems that do not resemble our own. Because it is true that the Westphalian model gives a narrow definition of what a system is, but our argument is that rather than trying to widen the definition of what an international system is, it is more productive to see the international system as just one system among a wide range of other systems within polities have interacted. And in this way, we will get a more thorough and accurate understanding of the condition and shape of current international relations. As mentioned earlier, the Peace of Westphalia established a system where the main actors would become sovereign nation-states. And as this system has extended from its core in Europe to the majority of the world by the end of the 20th century, it has been natural to call the relations between the emerging nation-states international relations. However, the continued emphasis on this has crippled the understanding of the emergence of other actors who have become more and more relevant as the hegemony of the Western nation-states has faded. Not only the increasing relevance of actors such as NGOs and MNCs, but also the emergence of an actor like China. Chinese political scientist Wei Zhang has pointed out that trying to conceptualize the world and an actor like China out of the box of Western political science is not accurate, and we have to break out of this paradigm to understand phenomena such as the magnitude of the rise of China in the past 70 years. And as a term and a field of study that is international relations largely emerged out of Western political science, we have to understand the inherent limits to the term international relations. How are we supposed to conceptualize China, who has had at least 7 imperial dynasties that lasted for longer than the whole existence of the US, and who with their 1.4 billion people have more people than all of Europe and US combined, as a unit similar to the US and all the small nation states in Europe? China does not even consider itself a nation state, but rather a civilizational state, and this serves as an example as to why international relations may be too narrow of a box out of which we can try to conceptualize the dynamics of the history and of the world today. This is not to completely invalidate the importance of international relations when trying to understand the world today, but rather to show that, as it seems like we're moving towards a system where nation states are not the dominant units, less importance has to be given to them when analyzing the world. However, just as we need the knowledge and understanding of previous systems within which polities have interacted in order to better understand international relations, we have also acknowledged that an understanding of international relations is not sufficient to get an all-encompassing understanding of the world. Thus, we also need to carry on the knowledge of the international system and international relations in order to understand how they have changed the world, our understanding of the world, and how it will certainly affect future systems within which humans interact across borders.